You are listening to Meet the Thriller Author, the podcast where I interview writers of mysteries, thrillers, and suspense books. I am your host, Alan Peterson, and this is episode number 98. In this episode of the podcast, we'll be meeting Andrew Mayne, a best-selling novelist and magician. Andrew is an Edgar-nominated author, Thriller Award finalist, star of Shark Week, and A&E's television's Don't Trust Andrew Mayne. His latest novel, The Girl Beneath the Sea, is a #1 bestseller on Amazon. Had a great time talking to Andrew about writing his novels, his writing process, swimming with sharks, doing magic, and a whole lot more. So stay tuned for that interview coming up. Before we get to the interview, I want to let you know about Masterclass. Go to thrillingreads.com/masterclass and get access to over 80 instructors with more than 16,000 minutes of content. You can learn anytime, anywhere, at your own pace. You can watch thousands of lessons from the best as they share their stories, skills, shortcuts, failures, and successes, including best-selling thriller and mystery writers David Baldacci, Dan Brown, and James Patterson. So learn from the best over at thrillingreads.com/masterclass. That is my affiliate link, so you can learn from the best while supporting this podcast. Coming right up, my interview with Andrew Mayne. Hi, Andrew. Welcome to the podcast. Thank you for doing this interview.
Hey, thanks for having me, Alan.
The Girl Beneath the Sea is out today. We're recording this on May 1st, and I just took a look. It's already the top of the charts on Amazon, so looks like it's an outstanding book launch. Congrats.
Thank you very, very much. I'm very grateful to work with a great team, so, that helps.
Started reading it a couple days ago, and what a fantastic opening of that that you have on that book. Can you tell us a little bit then about Sloane McPherson and this book?
Yeah, so The Girl Beneath the Sea is about a woman who's basically kind of a part-time police diver in Florida, where she'll work on evidence recovery, sometimes body retrieval, which is a real thing. Sometimes police departments will either contract out with other divers, or sometimes they have their own divers at work within the department doing that. And I grew up in South Florida, and my father was in law enforcement, my brother was in law enforcement, and I'd periodically hear stories about how they would have recovery divers work on some of their cases. And I always thought it's just an interesting sort of thing, particularly in a place like Florida where there's so much stuff underwater. And having grown up there and written some other thriller mysteries, I said, it'd be fun to just write a story and come up with a character that's of Florida and of that kind of world, but also make them very much a Florida sort of story. And that, Sloane comes from a family that was involved in doing treasure hunting, et cetera, probably earlier on, maybe a bit of smuggling, and maybe not so further back, as we find out in the case of her story, and give her sort of a complicated family, which she loves, but have her try to figure out her own path as she gets pulled into a bigger world of complications and conflicts.
That's interesting about you have family with a law enforcement background. Any of those cases working into your story here, or is that how do you come up with the idea?
My father was with the Treasury Department, specifically with the ATF, for his career. And while he did that, he did everything from working as going after moonshiners as a revenuer. He was a sky marshal back in the 70s. He was in the national response team, where if there was a bombing somewhere, he'd be part of the team that would fly across the country to go respond to that. Then he got involved when we moved to South Florida. He was part of one of the big task force that was put together between these different agencies to go after drug trafficking. So my dad had this kind of amazing career where dinner table conversation, we find out about how the right-hand man to some dictator in some country was involved in some drug operation, and how they were going after this person to, a court case they had where they'd gone after this person and got a witness and stuff. And so that was normal for me growing up, was talks about subpoenas and search warrants and, all this kind of thing. And I didn't realize that's not normal, so that certainly played into a lot of my storytelling. And then when I started writing a novel specifically set in South Florida, part of it was certainly shaped by being a kid, the child of a law enforcement officer in the 1980s going through that.
And I must say, too, I've been a big fan of Shark Week for decades. I don't know how long that show's been going on. So I was excited to see that you were hosting.
Incredible,
yeah. And you hosted a show, one of the shows called Ghost Diver. So how cool was that? Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, so I had this sort of crazy idea of what it would be like to try to fool great white sharks, because obviously, and I have a background in magic and illusion. I had a TV show I did magic on A&E, and I used to create magic before for like Penn Teller and David Blaine, and like working with David Copperfield. And I kind of said, I want to do something different with that. And I thought, using what we understand about deception and misdirection, would it work in the animal kingdom? Would it work with great white sharks? Which sounded, kind of like a really cool theoretical, abstract sort of idea, which led to me being in the Isle of Jaws, 60 feet underwater, surrounded by great white sharks with no cage.
What goes through your mind when you're doing that? Are you like, any regrets?
Yeah, it's one of those things where, the honest truth is, like, I have this idea of like, I think I have some ideas that might work, because I learned a little about like the way sharks sense things and stuff. Like, I might be able to do this to fool or camouflage myself with the sharks. And that was the purpose of Ghost Divers. I built the suit that would allow me to sort of theoretically interact with great whites and not have them pay attention to me, sort of have them be kind of invisible to them. And it starts off with this idea of like, I'll tell people, some people I know at Discovery Channel, I'll just throw this out there like, here's a crazy idea. They'll say no. And then I get to tell my friends and everybody like, yeah, I have this really cool idea, but it was just too extreme for them. Well, I went to Discovery Channel, told them about this, and they're like, hey, we love it. Can you pull it off? And now I'm like, sure. And, one thing leads to another, and I did a lot of training and everything else like that for it, and I get into the little submersible, and Andy Casagrande, who is, he's a regular at Shark Week, he's a camera guy, he's just adventure, amazing guy. So he's the guy who's going to be filming this and, piloting this thing down to the bottom of the ocean floor. And we get to the bottom, and we've got the little radio comms, and Andy gets on the radio, and he opens up the side door, and there are great white sharks all around us. He's like, and we have to do the test first without the suit, just me in a regular, scuba diving outfit and a plastic shield. And he's like, so, do you want to get out? And it's like, well, no, but I guess we're here, so I might as well. And it was an amazing experience. I'm terrified of sharks, absolutely terrified. I can scare myself out of a speed pool if I hear a splash. But for some reason, at that point right there, once you see the sharks, once they're in front of you, you kind of accept things, and then you just sort of proceed, and you're constantly alert and vigilant, because they would come in, swim around, wait for you not to look, and then they're ambush predators, which means they sneak up behind you. So if you're not constantly looking in their direction, and that was one of the things I didn't know in the beginning, was like, no, yeah, sharks can tell when you're looking at them. And I'm like, well, yeah, I guess fish have eyes, so that would make sense. And so you have to always be looking. And when you get up to like 14, 15 sharks, it's hard to keep track of them. And if you do a count and you realize you're short one shark, you turn around right away, because that great white is coming in to bump you, to see if you're going to put up a fight.
Wow. Oh, so that's why they're always circling when you see that. I didn't realize that they're always trying to figure out how to ambush you.
Well, they're very efficient predators. They don't like to take risks if they don't have to. They've been around for a long time. They're the apex predator for a couple reasons. One is that they don't take risks when they don't have to. And so they will, something like me in the water, a diver, they're like, what is that? Is that worth it or not? And often when people get attacked by sharks, we have a very low, ratio of muscle and fat compared to bone. So we're not their ideal thing to eat. Like they really prefer not to, because it's a lot of effort to do that. But sharks, one of the sense organs they have is their teeth. And in order to tell if something is worth eating, they bite it. And the problem is if you get a shark bite to see if you're worth eating, it's fatal for you.
Oh, yikes. Yeah, so that's why sometimes they take a bite. Oh, I didn't realize that. Okay, so they're like kind of seeing if they're going to like it, and they don't, but it's too late for you.
Exactly. They're like, oh, yeah, no, I don't spit that arm out. Anyhow, let me go find some. And and that's why, that could be scary. But you'll sometimes, though, and that's particularly great whites, other sharks some aren't so picky and stuff. And if things are, some other sharks can be more aggressive and whatnot. But generally speaking, like great whites and stuff, they were amazing. Absolutely, absolutely amazing. If they had wanted to kill me, I would not be here. They are intelligent. They have their own personalities. And it's just to be there close to this thing that I was terrified of, and to see them in the world of the place they belong and I do not, was an incredible experience, and just gave me such a deeper appreciation for them and understanding how important shark conservation is.
Yeah, and I noticed on your website that you had this a ghost diver VR experience that you created. Can you tell us a little bit about that? That's kind of cool.
Yeah, so when I was talking to people like Andy Casagrande and some others about Dr. Neil Hammerschlag, who University of Miami, who was helpful in understanding how sharks hunt, I wanted to prepare myself for that because you don't get a lot of practice to be around sharks. And so what I did is I built a virtual reality experience where I would put sharks in there. So you put on your VR headset, and I gave them sort of a very rudimentary kind of like an AI kind of logic that sort of made them behave in the way that I was told that sharks would, the great whites would, so that you would be underwater and basically what you had was a shield to defend yourself and then your attention. If you looked at a great white shark, as I was told, then they would tend to stay away. If you didn't pay attention to them a long enough time, then they would try to sort of circle around and come at you. So I built this VR experience to practice doing this, and it was terrifying. It was absolutely terrifying because I would just be in there and all of a sudden you see I had pretty realistic sharks in there. And anybody who's got like an Oculus Quest or anything that can, VR can actually play with this. I think it's ghostdiver.xyz. I think the site's still running. You can load it through a web browser. For me, it's scary, particularly when you go into night mode and all you can see is with your flashlight.
Yeah, that might be the only way that I would swim with the sharks would be in a virtual way.
I felt the same way, but thing happens is you start talking and then you start thinking about it, and the next thing you know, you're underwater, and first you're next to a tiger shark that's trying to push you out of the way, and then you're around a bunch of great whites that you're having to bump and touch things that you never wanted to touch.
So obviously you have a lot of experience growing up in Florida. You have a lot of diving experience. Is that why when you're coming up with the concept for Sloane, you wanted her to be a diver as well?
Yeah, Florida is interesting because you have canals. So I grew up living on a canal, which, we had a boat in the backyard, and, we'd be sometimes hopping out boat, sometimes let's go to the Bahamas in our boat, and we had a neighborhood that was very active like that. And I lived in, these waterways. And so as kids, we'd go out there, knee boarding out there, swimming in canals, and you'd see gators and stuff. You got used to it. And then you might, venture out a little bit more into some of the intercoastal stuff, and then the oceans. And in the oceans, you've got a lot of wonderful, wonderful scuba diving out there and snorkeling. And so having done so much of that was something that I just figured, this should be a neat thing to put into my books.
Do you still do magic?
I just did a talk day before yesterday for a member of the Magic Castle, which is a magic club in LA. So I did a talk on Zoom for the junior members, a bunch of these kids that are members of the Magic Castle. So I did a talk for that for 2 hours with them, and I've done some stuff like that. I did like a live presentation like before. And as far as performing, kind of the Discovery Channel thing was sort of the direction that was most interesting to me, is like, let me take the technical background of this and look for ways to apply it forward. But other than that, not terribly active.
And did you always wanted to be a writer? How long has that been passion for you?
Oh yeah, I think that I was like 10 years old or something when we lived in, this was right before we moved to Florida. We lived in Portland, Oregon, and we had a basement downstairs. We had a guest room, and my parents stored stuff in the closet. And I opened up the closet once, and there's one of those orange boxes, those, like, I think you've seen those like big, those boxes, the cardboard boxes. And I pulled this thing down there to see what was in there because I was that nosy of a kid. And it was filled with my dad's old science fiction books, Isaac Asimov, Robert Heinlein, Arthur C. Clarke, and the covers were amazing. I looked at these covers, and it was so much cooler than the stuff I was having to read in school. And I remember taking probably like a short story collection or something like that and just falling in love with it and getting into science fiction and just making my way through all of those books. And I think that I gravitated at that point probably to Isaac Asimov. And I thought that I looked at how prolific he was as a writer, and I thought that would be cool one day to have written as many books as he had, which I realize now is a complete impossibility for myself. But I was also interested in magic, and so magic and science were kind of like my big influences. So by the time I got to high school, I would write for fun. I was a bit of a creative writer, but I didn't see that writing was going to be a path that I was going to follow probably until much later in life. And then much later in life, I remember thinking one day, I've always wanted to write. Maybe I should do that now instead of waiting. And then I started taking it seriously. It was 8 years ago where I decided to just sit down and start writing my first. I was 9 years ago. Start writing my first novellas and novels. and then said, I'm going to just take this as seriously as I can. And I spent a year writing as much as I could. I did like 1 million words in a year.
Wow.
I would write a book, then I would analyze writing. I'd read a book on writing. I'd go back and write another book. And so I probably wrote like 6 novels, maybe 5 novels, 5 novellas in that period of time, just to try to just understand as much as I could in a compressed period of time.
And how many books have you published so far?
Published? All right.
I know you have the Naturalist book series, right? That's one of them.
Yeah, the Naturalist series. So the Naturalist series, there's 4 in that series so far. I did 3 Jessica Blackwoods, which was 7. So then we have The Girl Beneath the Sea, which is 8. And then I did the Orbital, Station Breaker, 10. And then I did, Public Enemy Zero was my first novel. Probably published like 14 or 15 books, novels. And then unpublished, I have easily twice as many just sitting in a box somewhere.
Oh, wow. Do you ever go back to revisit those?
Sometimes no. And these were unpublished things I never even submitted. These were just things that I just wrote to say, once I taught myself just how to sit down and write, and turn a book out in a week or so, just get the thing onto paper. I realized that that's a thing I should probably do, is just to work on character, to work on storytelling, just get in the habit of just writing and not worry about outcome. And I don't really revisit my stuff. I kind of just sort of think I take the thing from it, because at the end of it, I have like 1 million things. Oh, I wish I did this. I wish I did this. I wish I did that. So I kind of just, and it's probably a flaw with me, I just sort of like to move forward, and I don't like to look back.
So what is your writing process from start to finish for when you start a new book? Because 1 million words a year is incredible.
Well, I don't do 1 million words a year now. That was like my first, probably 250,000 now. So what I do is that, for me, it generally starts with trying to come up with a good character. And if I have the character, and let's say I'm writing another book in a series, then obviously you want to figure out what's going to be a conflict that is cool. And I prefer to use, when I start off, with a conflict instead of plot, because conflict implies the thing that changes, what they have to change or what they have to adapt to. It just sort of my own sort of internal way of thinking about it. And then I might think about a theme, and I'll write a mission statement for a book, and that is, I want this to happen in this story. I want my character to go through this journey here. I want to have maybe, these are the dramatic elements I want to have happen. I try to kind of bullet point those things, because as writers, we get often lost along the way, and we pursue other things in the middle of a book, but then we feel that maybe it's not quite where it wants it to be. And then you get to the end of it and you have that uncertainty. But if I have a mission statement and I hit a couple of the critical points that I know I need to do, and I follow my outline, even if I get to the end of the book and I'm really uncertain about it, generally the book is pretty well received. And so I know that's a really good way for me to counteract whatever self-doubt I have, is to say at the beginning, this is what I need to do. And if I get to the end of it, go like, look at that list. Did I do what I needed to do? I'm like, yeah, I think I did. Then I feel good.
The software program that you used to write, I always like to ask this to my guests, is it like Word or something else?
When I talk about writing, I use a few different tools. And by the time I sit down to write, I've already done a lot of little note taking. I've got an outline, a chapter by chapter outline that's pretty specific about the conflicts of each chapter. And I may have taken photos on my phone and used stuff. I may have used Google Maps to go look at locations and stuff. Like I just had to do that, middle of writing a book right now, and I had to stop and pull up Google Maps and stuff, because I'm like, I kind of know a bit about this location, but let me pull it up there. I'm like, oh, this is interesting. I'm going to use that. I use my note app on my phone for a lot of little parts of writing. So I think those tools are just as important as the actual, word processor. But for the actual writing itself, I'm a big fan of Scrivener. I started using Word, which Word to me is not a thing that ideal for writing long form content. I did a thing where I tried for a while using like Google Docs, which was neat because it was easier to do collaborative, because I could just let people come in and like edit. But Google Docs does not like really long documents. And then I went to Scrivener, and I tried a Scrivener for 1 or 2 books. But I said, the learning curve's kind of high here. Let me go back to writing in Word or something else. And I did that, and it was miserable. And then I went back into Scrivener, and I have it left. So Scrivener, I'm a big fan of that. And for people who are looking to deliver produce their own ebooks, or their own, if you want to do self-published stuff, which is how I got my start, and I still like to do from time to time, there's a great program for the Mac called Vellum. If you go to vellum.pub, VELLUM.pub, It will produce really nice looking ebooks and print versions of your books.
Oh yeah, I use Vellum. It's a fantastic software. So yes, okay. So what's the difference now? Because now you're working with Thomas and Mercer. Any differences between when you're doing it on your own versus now working with a publishing house?
Yeah, I've worked with a few different publishers in the past, and I think that every publisher sort of has probably their strengths and what they're good at. And early on I was with HarperCollins, and I had a wonderful editor there, Hannah Woods, who taught me a lot about it was great because that was coming as sort of this new author, very new author, and working with somebody like her she was a young person too, but she just knew how to really help an author sort of make the best version of what they could do. That was helpful, and that was one of the things I really took from that experience there, was just having that there. Working with Thomas and Mercer has been fantastic because my editor there, Liz Pearsons, is great. She's very good at me sort of laying out, this is what I want to do. We bring in some really good developmental editors. I've had Ed Stackler, who's worked with me in the last several books, and it's been a wonderful fit. He knows the right way to manage a writer's ego. In the past, I've had some editors who are like, I'm like, I don't think they realize how condescending they're being. Just tell me you don't like this thing. Don't spend this, don't put all this weird faint praise here thinking that I'm going, oh, okay. I'm like, just tell me it doesn't work. That's been a great experience there. The whole team there has been wonderful. And one of the things is that I made my start when ebooks took off. And so I'm used to sort of e-publishing, and also the idea, and it's a faster sort of cycle in some ways, in that if I want to change the cover of a book, I can change the cover of a book, because I'm not thinking that the canonical version of my book is the print version. If I want to change the description of my book as I understand how people have been reading and responding to it, I can go in and do that. I understand that if you're selling books through phones and tablets, when that cover is shrunk down to the size of a postage stamp, you have to be able to look at that and understand what it is. Traditional publishers not always think that way. And, they have their own strengths to what they do. And I would say that I've had a great experience at Thomas & Mercer, because I think that this publishing company's developed in that world. I'm a writer that started from that period of time. And so it's very easy for them to go, let's go do this. I'm like, yes, that makes complete sense to me. Let's do this.
Yeah, the cover for the Girl Beneath the Seas is really awesome. It's really, really catchy.
Yeah, and that's been one of the little things I appreciate, is how involved I've been able to be in the process there. Sometimes you go to publishers and they're kind of like, we're going to tell you how it is. You can tell us you don't like it, but you better like it. And from the first cover they did, for the cover for The Naturalist, which was M.S. Corley's the cover illustrator who did that, which was just a fantastic, this was this fur with the letters woven between there, and that got, it was picked as like one of the top 10 covers of the year, etc. And all the way through there, they put a lot of attention to that. And so The Girl Beneath the Sea, they showed me the cover and with the colors, and those were some of my favorite color schemes and stuff. I was just very, very thrilled. And, I had my little, let's try this, let's try that. And my agent's like, make his name bigger. And I'm like, I like to hear that.
Well, I also noticed that you're a podcaster. I saw on your website, you have the Weird Things podcast, a couple other podcasts. That's pretty neat. How are you enjoying that?
Oh, I love that. I've been doing that podcast now for 15 years. And then, I started getting involved before we had the term podcasting. I used to be involved in science education, critical thinking communication. And, back when we have to go use things like, like Real Networks and whatever kind of streaming stuff. So I've always been involved in that. And I've loved that, because I like the idea that not every medium has to be a mass medium. Some mediums can be kind of a more focused medium. And so doing the Weird Things podcast was great, because I had come from the world of magic and also having written books for magicians. And I had an audience of, let's say, magicians who liked my content, but I wanted to reach out to a larger audience. So Weird Things was a great stepping stone, which eventually led to me building an audience as an author. And, I've had a lot of people that have been along that journey, that started reading, like, when I was publishing magic books as a 20-year-old kid, that were like, these are ideas I've had. I've had people who followed all along the way, and other people have come along through there. But it's been a wonderful experience. And I think that I'm very, very lucky to have had an audience that's, when I wanted to say, hey, check out my books, do this, that came from my Weird Things audience. That came from the audience of people who listen to that podcast.
So what's next for you and Sloan McPherson? I see there's a second book that's coming out.
Yeah, Black Coral, which comes out, I got to check the pub date on that. And I think February. So Black Coral is going to be kind of the next, where does she go? Assuming she survives the first book, it could be a prequel, everybody, who knows? Where does she go? She's learned, she's pulled into the world of more taking law enforcement more seriously. What's next for her? What's next for her as a person, and where she's going with that? So that's going to be the next book for Sloane McPherson. And then I have my series, The Naturalist, which stars Theo Cray, who's this computational biologist who ends up hunting serial killers. I have a book with him coming out next year where he's going to pair up with my Jessica Blackwood character, which is from my Angel Killer series, where she's a woman in the FBI who comes from a family of stage magicians. And so I've got that book coming out too, which is going to be fun. It's the first time I'm able to take two of my characters from different series and put them together and kind of shift between points of view and see how they interact.
Oh, wow, yeah, that sounds like a lot of fun.
Or it could be a disaster.
Yeah, well, after swimming with sharks, though,
Yeah, failure has a different threshold for me now.
Andrew, before I let you go, I always like to ask my guests, because I have writers who are listening to this podcast. Any advice for writers out there?
Yeah, I mean, and I feel okay. First, I feel silly giving advice because I'm still figuring things out. Let me make that very, very clear. And I'm not sitting here with my pipe in my reading room and let me tell everybody the secrets to writing. I don't have a clue, but I can tell you what's changed me and helped me on the broad sort of thing is you don't need other people's approval. You don't need publishers to tell you that you're good. You don't need that. That is not what makes you a writer. You're a writer because you write. And your audience doesn't have to be everybody. You could write in a very narrow niche and you can self-publish and you can have a wonderfully rewarding experience. When I started writing, my plan was just to be self-published because I saw that it was growing and I had really good economic success as a self-published author. It was one of the things that worked out really well. And I started working with publishers because it's another outlet to do it. But all the time I'll talk to writers like, I want to do this, but I want to find a publisher. I want to do this. And I'm like, that's great. If that's your dream, to me, that's a silly dream. My dream is to have people reading my books. And I want the shortest path between, writing a book and that as possible, putting out quality material, of course. So don't wait for permission. Don't care what other people think. I mean, you still get this sort of thing. Like, again, I started a self, and now I've worked with a number of publishers, and I'm just as proud of my self-published books as I am of my published ones. And I'd love for people to get into their heads the understanding of, this is 2020. A printing press is a computer. A publisher is just a name. And there are great publishers, and there are so-so publishers. There are publishers that understand the world we're in, and there are publishers that don't. But most of all, what matters is just creative people doing what they do best. And you could put out a self-published book and work with some of the same people that a publisher would have you work with. And I have a wonderful publisher, and it's been a great experience for me. But if I couldn't have that experience, I'd still be writing and still be doing stuff regardless. Don't wait for permission. Don't wait for approval. Some of the best success stories we've heard now have been books that traditional publishers have turned down. My favorite example is, I don't know how apocryphal it is, but that, Harry Potter got turned down 40 times. 40 times, okay? 40 publishers looked at this book and said, man, don't think it has much potential. And it's going to be more complicated than that because, it would have been the hit that it was if it had taken a different route. But that's the most successful children's book of all time. One of the most successful film franchises of all time was a book that 40 people, 40 professionals paid to find things that would make money, said they did not see the potential in it. So that's the world we go into as writers, is that we're putting our stuff in front of people that publishers and editors have to make choices. And it's not necessarily that they said it was bad. It's just that they had only so many opportunities to publish or put things out there, and they had to say no. And that means having to say no to wonderful things. So, I talk to my editors, and there's stuff that they love. Like, I wish I could have done this, but I could only do this many books this year. There's this other thing I love, this writer I love. And they have to make these choices. They're doing the best they can do, but the industry the way it is means that great stuff is going to be overlooked, but because of self-publishing. J.K. Rowling had written that book today. I think after the third or fourth no, she would have self-published.
Yeah, that's great. That's great advice. Yeah, a lot of opportunities now. So that's I love hearing that. And the best place for readers to find you probably be your website, andrewmayne.com.
Yeah, Andrew Mayne, MAYNE.com.
Yeah, right, Andrew. Thank you so much for talking to us. I really enjoyed our chat.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thanks for listening to the Meet the Thriller Author podcast. Be sure to visit thrillerauthors.com to join the conversation, access the show notes, and discover great thrilling reads. If you enjoy the podcast, I'd love for you to subscribe, rate, and give a review to it, wherever it is that you're listening to this podcast, be it iTunes, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Stitcher, TuneIn, Spotify, wherever it is that you're listening to this right now. I would appreciate it. And please do check out my own thriller novels over at my website at alanpeterson.com. Until next time.